Let's jump into preferences, which is far more interesting than the keyboard shortcut Command H. So there's a lot of preferences, and you know what? Most of them are pretty obvious, so I'm not going to go through these one by one by one by one. Let me just quickly guide you through, see if there's any pointers I can do while looking at these. Color picker, doesn't matter. Just use Adobe. It's a great color picker. Yeah. The HUD, that stands for heads up display right there, and this is kind of when you're using the eyedropper tool. So click I, or when you hold down Alt or Option when you're using the brush. Do you want just like a small hue strip to pop up? So this is kind of like this little thing. What do you want this to look like? So that's what that option is all about. And then image interpolation, just go with what they have by Cubic Automatic. It's going to be right most of the time. And if you don't know what it means, just stick with it on standard. Okay, options, auto up. Okay, I really don't want to go through these individually. Read them, look at them. If you don't know what they mean, just Google them. You can just Google it. That's a thing you can do. The world's lovely like that. And then history log just kind of keeps a history of everything that you've done just forever inside of metadata. I've never gotten into using it. I'm sure some people who get deep into doing actions and also scripting inside of Photoshop, this is a huge item for them, but we're not getting into scripting in Photoshop. That's a whole other level that honestly, don't worry about it. Like, seriously. So color theme, pretty straightforward, changes the color theme. I like this one because it's dark and my eyes stare at a computer all day, but I'll do it on this one because it's slightly calmer and doesn't seem scary. And then this is something when you hit the F button. So, when you go between this to this to this, you can make it so each of these are different, and that's just you're changing it inside of interface. So you can change these right here. So standard screen, full screen mode, full screen, default none. So exactly what's inside of all of them. So anyway, text, okay, yeah, pretty easy. I've never put this to large before. We need to restart it. I'm going to keep it on the standard one right there. And again, all of these are just small little options for changing the interface. I'm not going to go through them one by one. Show channels in color, enable text drop shadows, blah, blah, blah. You play around with them. You can do this yourself. Sync settings have to do with the Creative Cloud, how you want things to upload and download to it. Again, I don't do much with the Creative Cloud. If you're doing more with it, great. I mean, you can choose what to sync and all of that. I don't know too many people who just depend on the Creative Cloud, so this one's pretty obvious. So there's a few things to note inside of file handling. Image previews, so this is basically if you hit spacebar or something, you can get a preview of the image. Generally, you always want to save, it's just a convenience right there. Append file extension, so it's .psd or .jpeg. Yeah, it's a good thing to have right there, especially if you're doing anything with the web. Although if you're doing anything with the web, just save for web, and then it will definitely append the file extension. And then there's automatically save recovery every 10 minutes. That's pretty reasonable. If you're doing web design or design layout in general, you might want to change that towards something like 5 minutes because the files generally aren't very big, and it's good to have that constant recovery. And if you're working with gigantic images and you're worried about it slowing down your machine, you might want to save it less often. So just something to be aware of. If Photoshop seems to be slowing down immensely, this is one place to look. But you can probably just leave it at default. Camera raw preferences, you can leave all of these at default unless you're having a problem with camera raw. These are pretty good right here. And again, all of these pretty good. So maximize PSD and PSB file compatibility always. I didn't get into this. PSD, those are the standard Photoshop file types. If you save as PSB, that's very similar to the PSD file type, but it's for files that are just gigantic. So it's for files that are, you have a 5 gigabyte file. You'll want to have that as a PSB. And, it's just when you get into really big files, probably even 500 megabytes, 1 gigabyte, something like that. Now, performance is an interesting one. There's a couple of things to note right here. One of them is that this kind of is all of the settings for 3D and then just making sure that you're using the right 3D options. That's right here. Less interesting. This is interesting to note, like how much RAM should Photoshop use? And this depends on if you're using a lot of programs at once or just Photoshop at once. So I would put this up like very much all the way. Well, maybe not all the way, but a lot of the way if Photoshop is the only program that's open. But if you have like Photoshop open and a 3D program open and Illustrator open, you might want to take this down quite a bit more. I'm going to keep it at the 70%. History and cache. So this is the number of undos that you have. So you can set this all the way to like 1,000 or something. But if you have that, if you do that, the computer is storing 1,000 different like save states, like different history states, which really bogs it down. So that's something to keep in mind. However, if you are doing something like just moving around vectors or like just moving around images and you wanted to remember every single one of those, rather than doing things like adding more images and erasing and like really affecting things in that way, if you're doing something like painting where it's just like stroke, 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 it could be good to have like 400 history states because then you can just undo quite a bit. But if you're like working with large images, that's going to really bog down Photoshop. So that's just something to keep in mind. History states is a more interesting one than cache levels or cache tile size. So I'm going to focus on that right now. I haven't personally gotten to a point where cache level and cache tile size affects the performance too much, but you can read all about it inside of the description panel down there if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of that. History states, though, very, very important. Scratch disk is where it's by default keeping all of the RAM information. RAM information? Yeah, I think that's the term right there. Painting cursor, this is just kind of the display of how it looks. Don't do this one. Good God, come on, come on. This is precise. The other way to get to precise is just hitting caps locks when it's on this tool right here. And then the difference between normal brush and full-size brush is basically this one's like roughly the size of the brush, and this one's like where's the end of the fade-out point right there. So if you have a soft edge, this will show you where like the end of the fade-out point is. This will show you the center point, which used to be really good when you were using the stamp tool, but now that they just show you a duplication of the place that you're stamping from, you're fine either way. And then this one I've never used. Listen, I don't know everything, folks. You can play with that. There's a popover that describes everything. This is a very big program. Let's keep going. You can Google it if you really care that much. Standard, precise. All right, you got it. Easy. And then brush preview color. Brush preview color has to do with previewing the size of the brush, and it shows it as a red preview right there. I never use that, and if you've been following my way of learning things, you'll never use it either. But you can change the color of what the brush preview is in here. It's pretty straightforward. All right, transparencies, this is kind of what you see in the background. And what I would suggest is you just keep it at the default right here. I mean, that's just classic Photoshop. Going to this, that's crazy town. Come on, custom? What are you gonna do? Like put a picture of red? Just keep it as this thing. That's what everyone does. Like you can affect it. You can make it larger. You can make it smaller. But why bother? What a waste of time. So with column size, this is something that actually only affects things if you're going into image or canvas size. So if I were to go into canvas size, and then instead of increasing it by inches or pixels or percent or millimeters or point to pixels, I can increase it by number of columns. Now, let me be honest. I had to Google this to figure this out because this is not something that people are doing all that often. Like if you're working with a certain design template, you're not going to be increasing it with columns here. There's far better plugins to do this than the built-in options here with the columns and the gutters. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. And then, points or picas. If you're working with points and picas, you probably have a good idea of what you need to use. And if you're not working with points and picas, don't worry about it. Standard print resolution is 300. Standard screen resolution is 72. That has stayed the same despite Retina and everything else going out there. And units and type, I would keep type as points because that's just pretty standard what's used across the world. Rather than, or at least in the US where I'm using it, rather than changing a ruler right here, what I would suggest you do is just right click on ruler and do it here. So when you're inside of the image, just do it like this. That's a little bit more intuitive than going into Photoshop preferences, units and rulers, and then doing it down here. So let's go into guides, grids, and slices. This is when you're doing guides, grids, and slices, what colors everything are in. So so cyan, this is basically if I'm dragging something with this, it's going to be cyan. If I'm doing like when we're aligning everything, that's all going to be in magenta. This is if I set up a grid. So if I have something, clicked the wrong thing. So if I have something like this on it, what's this looking like? So view, where's grid? I only know the keyboard shortcut of, what is this? Command quote sign. So show extras. So, and then it's grid right here. You can turn this on and off. And you can change the size of it. Again, there are far better plugins than I got into in the design session than the standard built-in grid, but you can change the size right here. And in previous versions, before there was plugins, this was actually really helpful. Speaking of plugins, there's all sorts of ways to download plugins, though I'll be honest, I normally just do it the old-fashioned way of dropping it into the folder, but if you are doing a lot of things with plugins, you can do things from here. And working with plugins is bigger than the scope of me going through the menus. Type, this is actually really cool in CC. There's a Middle Eastern and South Asian thing. I have someone who works with Hebrew type all the time, and this was game-changing for not needing to get like the, the Middle East version of Photoshop. It's all built in now. Game-changing option. But for most people, totally unnotable, so whatever. All right, smart quotes, all of these. There's actually a lot of really amazing things that happen with fonts. So yeah, just keep it as standard. 3D, again, I've been saying this over and over, 3D is beyond the scope of this class, even with the advanced sections. 3D is just something that most people aren't going to get into too much. So just keep this as standard, because once you start pulling the thread of 3D, there's all sorts of things until you end up using Cinema 4D and you're in a whole other land. Enable multi-tone 3D printing. Listen, when it comes to 3D printing, good luck. You're on your own. I don't happen to own a 3D printer. It's pretty amazing that Photoshop does stuff with it, and for the 0.01% of people looking for that, huzzah! So there's options here. There's an entire checkbox. Also, I'm using a Mac, so I can't show you some of the Windows-only features, but I assure you, this is pretty straightforward. There's some touch options for things that have touch screens that I don't even have options for right there. Anyway, those are all of the general preferences. You can see it's pretty straightforward. Some of the things I'm just saying Google it because, like, animated zoom makes a more interesting zoom. Always create smart objects when placing. Like, you know, you can see how these are interesting. If you drag and drop something into your canvas, you want it to be a smart object. Like, I could go through every single one, but good God, just play around with it. Click it on, click it off. You don't need to listen to me. Just jump into the program. You're good. Let's move on. Hey, so this is part of a larger class, and if you're interested in really going much deeper into Photoshop, or if you just want to donate a bit of money my way to allow me to make more videos like this, please click on the link below and donate what you can. Also subscribe, and thanks for watching.